Okay, so what are we referring to? We're referring to the law of what that in the Talmud is bar mitzvah, literally means the neighbor. It's the law of the person sitting on the border. And it's very similar to the American concept of right of first refusal, which means that if I want to sell my land under certain circumstances, if I agree, if I gave that right to my neighbor would have the right to be the first one to buy it at this price that I set. And in American law, it has to be agreed upon. In other words, if I'm selling my house, I have to give my neighbor the right to that, to be the first one to buy it. But as we will see in Talmudic law, under certain circumstances, there's a much broader concept, a much broader right of first refusal, a much broader law of the neighbor. And the law says that if you're going to sell your land to anybody and some stranger wants to come into town and buy your field, well, I have a field right next to your field. For me, it would be a very big benefit if I can plow both my fields together, as opposed to having to move my equipment from one field and then move it a mile away to another field. So for the neighbor, it is a tremendous benefit to be able to get both fields together. And therefore, the Talmud evokes the verse in the Torah, which says, "V'asita hayashar v'atov," do what is good and just. In other words, go beyond the letter of the law. And although the letter of the law, the neighbor does not own the land, it's the owner owns the land, but the neighbor could then remove any person who buys the land under certain conditions, as we will see, by paying them the amount of money that they paid for that land. And it's a much broader law. So, like I said, it's some involvement in the free market. So some people like it, some people don't. We'll analyze it. We're starting the Talmud and Maimonides start a little bit earlier. In other words, a more limited case, and then it spreads out to the broader case. So we'll have plenty of time to discuss it. But in the meantime, any comments or questions, please share. Otherwise, I think we'll jump right in. And what I want to do is I'm going to read the first section of Maimonides, and then maybe go back to the Talmud and see how in the Talmud it was much more contentious. And then we'll see how Maimonides rules. So I think we'll get a little bit of background as well. So that's the big picture. But even before, that's one introduction. Another introduction is this is an interesting concept. It's a unique type of law. Usually, there's the law, and then there's beyond the letter of the law. So the law tells me what I have to do, and then if I want to do more than the law, I have the right to, but the law can't force me. This is one exception. There are very, very few exceptions where the law would say the court will enforce you to do what is beyond the letter of the law. The court is going to force you to do what the nice thing. Legally, you don't have to. But because the Torah says you should do the nice thing, the court is going to say, we are enforcing this. Now, like I said, it's a very limited application. It only applies to this. This was a big deal. And again, even this, you will see, it had there are many, many, many limitations. Okay, so I'm going to start. And in the beginning, the first case is less controversial. So it's always good to start from the less controversial case. Okay, so where are we? We're in the laws of Maimonides, the laws of Shechenim, the laws of relatives, chapter 12, section 1. The following rules apply when brothers or partners. So this is a different case. This is not the case that I mentioned of a stranger coming to buy a piece of land. But you have one piece of land owned by a few brothers or a few partners. So the following rules apply when brothers or partners come to divide a field, with each taking a portion. If the field was all of equal value, without one place being better and another worse, but instead it was all the same, the field is divided by measure. By measure means you evaluate the size. In other words, later we talk about a case where some of the field is better land, more fertile. So then you have what they call the edit, the quality, versus the ziburit, the bad section of the field. So then if you want to divide, you can't divide it by acres, because not all the acreage is the same. But assuming it's all the same, assuming we're all brothers or we're all partners, we want to divide the field, and the field all has the same, and the field is all the same quality, we divide it by measure, acre for acre. Okay. If one of the partners said, give me my portion on the side so that I will be close to another field which I own, so that they will be one large field, his request is heeded, and we compel the other partner to grant him this privilege. For holding back in such a situation would be a reflection of the traits of Sedom. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but let's first get the case. What's the case? The case is we have 4 brothers and we own a field. And I happen to have another field on the east side of this field that a field belongs to the partnership. So I tell my brothers, look, everyone's getting a portion. Please give me my portion on the east side adjacent to my other field. Now I have another brother who doesn't like me, just wants to make my life miserable. And my brother says, no, I want that one. I said, what do you care? This one, that one, it's all the same. He says, no, I like the east side. I like that side. So the law is, if it's all the same, and I'm one of the brothers, and I'm a neighbor, and I have a neighboring field, you allow, but it's all the same quality, you allow me to get my field, my portion adjacent to my field. This, I don't think anyone can argue. I think this is logical. What's the logic we put forth? We say this is because the law, the phrase is kaifin. We force. I'm sorry, no, it doesn't say this. Yeah, literally kaifin. We almost like we force. The court gets involved when we see the trait of Sedom. What's the trait of Sedom? So Sedom is a terrible city, of course, the biblical city that was destroyed because of their wickedness. They're known for outlawing charity. But in the Talmud, the definition of Sedom is if someone else could benefit and I don't lose anything, yet I just want to deprive you benefits, not because I want to benefit. Of course, I would rather benefit than you benefit. That's okay. That's normal. That's human nature. But for me to say, I don't want you to benefit, even though I'm not benefiting, that we say that's unjust, right? The other brother, doesn't matter where he gets his field, east, west, north, south, doesn't matter. Makes no difference. But he doesn't want me to have my 2 fields adjacent. That the court says, no, we're not going to withstand for this injustice. We're going to step in and we're going to force the brother who has a field next to this partnership field to get his portion next to his other field. So both of his fields should be adjacent, which is much more convenient. Like my son told me a story. There was once a guy who hated his friend, and he told his friend, and so the king decided he's going to make peace. So he tells this guy, look, I'll give you whatever you want, but on condition that you agree that your enemy gets double. That was a very big problem. Once he asked for $1 million, the other guy gets $2 million. $1 billion, the other guy gets $2 billion. He couldn't figure out what to do. Finally, after a week of thinking, he comes back to the king. He says, I know what you want. I says, I know what I want. King says, what do you want? He says, I want you to poke out one of my eyes. Of course, he's hoping that the other guy would lose both eyes. But okay, so that's the mentality that the Talmud says we don't allow that to happen. We're going to enforce, and we're going to say that we're going to compel the partners to give this brother or this partner who has an adjacent field to have both of his fields adjacent to each other. That's if all the fields are the same. If, however, second paragraph, if, however, one portion was a higher quality than the other. Now that's one possibility. Another possibility where there's this the parts aren't equal, closer to a river or to the path, right? So one part of the field was closer to a river, so it makes it easier to water the field, or closer to the path, so it's easier to access. And the 2 portions were evaluated, the good being made equivalent to the bad, and one of the partners asked that he be granted a portion of a particular side. We do not heed his request. Instead, they receive their portions by lot. So remember, we said in the beginning, if everything is equal, then you divide it by measure, acre for acre. But if you don't, you can't. That's not equal. Some part of the field has an advantage. Then you have to evaluate. You say, you know what? the part that's next to the water, you'll get a smaller portion of the field. And the part that's distant from the water gets a larger portion of field. And that's how you can equal it out. If that's the case, that you divided it, but they're not exactly equal, and one brother says, and one partner says, I want the better field next to my, or any one portion next to my field, there, they cannot, that brother cannot force the other brothers to give him that part. Why? Even though we have to divide it this way, because it's not equal, it's not, because it's not equal, the law of Sedom, this is not the character of Sedom. Because the brother says, I want a smaller part with the river, rather than a larger part without the river. The other brother also says, I want that. So it's not the same. If it's not the same, you don't have a right to it just because you're closer to it. And in that sense, what do we do when there's a disagreement? We can't figure out how to divide. We make a lottery. So that's a very interesting thing. So you see where the Talmud is starting from. The Talmud is starting from all else being equal, and there's no advantage to one or the other. And one brother says, can I have both my fields adjacent? And the other brother says, no, I want that piece. We say, come on, be a mensch. Don't be, I don't want to use any bad words. Don't be an idiot. Let your brother have it. We're going to enforce. But if the fields are different, in other words, the quality is different. One is closer to a river, one's closer to a road. And then you have to start dividing it a little differently and decide, sort of give one person a better quality and the other person more quantity. If that's the case, if that's how you're dividing, and then one brother wants a certain part next to his field, and the other brother insists that he wants it, then you divide it by lottery, because the logic falls away. The logic of imposing this law is, like we said earlier, one benefits and the other one doesn't lose. But in this case, the other one says, I'm losing because I want specifically this field. So that is the way it's divided so far. So that's clear in the Talmud. The third paragraph is a case where it's not clear, and Maimonides relies on the tradition of the Gaonim. The Gaonim are the teachers that follow the Talmud, and Maimonides says, he quotes the opinion of the Gaonim, and he says, I agree with the Gaonim. I lean to that conclusion, and this is one of the few times that Maimonides gives his own opinion explicitly, but here it goes. So let's see the third case. If one said to them, give me only half the measure of the entire property, although I am being given from the lower quality portion without the field being evaluated, and you can receive the half of higher quality so that my portion will be closer to the field. What's the case? Let's make it simple. There are two partners. My field is on the east side. We have two partners. I want both my fields next to each other. So I tell my partner, look, the west side is the quality side. It's the better side. So usually what we would do is I would get more of the lesser quality. In other words, one half would be, let's say 70% of the field would be lesser quality, and the other 30% would be the better quality. And that's how we would divide. We would divide 70-30. And in that case, if we're dividing 70-30, the neighbor, the brother with the neighboring field cannot say, I want both my fields next to each other and give me the 30 quality, because the other brother says, I want the 30 quality, or the 70, or the 70% that has less quality. But what happens if I come to my neighbor, my partner, and I say, look, I will take 50% of the bad quality, which is less than I'm entitled to, but I want both my fields next to each other. Oh, that's already an interesting case. Why is that an interesting case? It's an interesting case because that's not spelled out in the Talmud. So therefore, Rambam says, Maimonides says, 3 lines before the end of the paragraph, the Gaonim ruled that his request is heeded. My conception also leans toward this conclusion. Is it appropriate to rule in this manner? So Maimonides says, I think that's right. I think that's correct. It's not clearly in the Talmud, so we don't know, but that's what he thinks. So in other words, to summarize, we have 3 cases. The first case, the 3 different paragraphs. The first paragraph is when the quality of the field is the same. I'm a neighbor. I'm one of the partners. I have a field, my neighboring field, and I say, I want my portion to be next to my neighboring field. In that case, even if the brothers protest, the law is we enforce the quality of Sedom. In other words, we enforce against the quality of Sedom. Quality of Sedom is where someone else says, I don't want you to benefit, even though I'm not benefiting, right? So there's no loss to me, but I want to deprive you of a benefit. So we enforce that, and we basically say, the brother could say, I want both my fields next to each other. I want my portion, which is next neighboring to my field. That's case one. Case two, if the quality is not the same, and therefore we divide the field not by the amount of space, but acre for acre, but we divide it where the person who gets the better quality will get less land. So 30% for the good quality versus 70% to the bad quality. If that's the case, and one brother says, I want one of those, either 30 or 70, and I want it next to my field, and another brother protests, then the brother who's the neighbor cannot unilaterally take one specific piece because they're not the same. If they're not the same, then the other brother has a claim, I want that part. And therefore, what is the law? The law is that you make a lottery. You cannot enforce that you want both your fields next to each other. And finally, the third case is if I come to my brother and I say, look, I will take lesser quality. I will take less amount of the lesser quality, not 70% of the bad quality, but I'm going to take 50% of the bad quality. And you take 30% of the good and 20% of the bad. You're winning here all across the board. All I'm asking is to give me my fields next to each other. There, the Talmud is silent. Maimonides says the Gaonim, the post-Talmudic sages say that you heed the request of the brother. And Maimonides says, I think that's right. I think my opinion leans in that direction. Go ahead, Vicky.
I have a question. What if in the third case, the other party protests?
So that we're talking about the other party is protesting. It's not unilateral. It is unilateral. The other brother protests. Maimonides and the Gaonim will still say, we'll still allow the brother who's the neighbor to get both his fields next to each other.
Even if the other one in the third case, even if he protests, yes. I don't want have
yes.
that.
Yes, that's what Maimonides says. That's what we listen. Yeah, that's the case. Again, he's saying, I don't know. The Talmud doesn't say this case, but that's what he's saying, right? So if the Talmud says a case where they're not exactly the same, so you have to use your evaluation. You have to evaluate to make two portions that are sort of similar. One will be smaller quality, lesser amount, but more quality. And the other one will be more quantity, but less quality. If that's the case, then each has an advantage. If each has an advantage, then a person could say, I want this advantage, I want that advantage. It's hard to say which one is better. And therefore the other brothers can insist, no, I want that one's better for me. But if it's clear, the third case, it's pretty clear that the brother who wants his fields next to each other is really conceding. He's getting only 50% of the lesser quality. He's really entitled to more. And if the division would be otherwise, he would be entitled to more. He would get 70% of the lesser quality.
Yeah, so, I understand. So yeah. in this case, it's closer to Sedom rule because he's not benefiting. He just doesn't want him to get what he wants. But right. What if in the second case there are no protests?
No protest is no problem. If everybody agrees, there's no problem. Then I'll get the part next to myself. Yeah.
Yeah. There is no lottery, nothing, no problem.
Yeah, there's no problem. We have no problem. You want to get, we're talking about if there's a protest. Correct.
Thank you.
The cases that everybody agrees are the boring cases. We're not going to waste our time on the boring cases. Okay, let's see if there's any interesting Talmud that we could look at just to get a feel. Okay, so we'll read a little Talmud, which is going to see, it's not clear exactly what the Talmud is talking about. So we'll read the Talmud, and then when you go back to Maimonides, you'll see how Maimonides explains the piece of Talmud. So let's see, let's jump in, and maybe let's jump in. I think we can do this. So this is Talmud Tractate Baba Batra, which is the third gate. The gate is the section we've been discussing, which is about real property, real estate. And here's page 12, page 12b. We start with the story. We start with the story. It is reported that a certain person bought land along the boundary of his father's property, right? So my father has a piece of land, and then I brought neighboring to my father. But when my father, if the father passes away, now I'm a partner with my brothers in my father's land. So that's the scenario where I am neighboring to another field that I am a partner in. After some time, the father died. When they came to divide the estate, the person said to his brothers, "Give me my portion of the estate along my boundary." Right? So the Talmud doesn't get into if it's better or it's not better. You'll see Maimonides is the one who explains that. But basically, the story is the Talmud comes and says that the guy comes and says, "I want my portion. I'm inheriting part of this field. Give me my portion at the border of my lands, next to my neighboring plots." So Rabbah said, in a case such as this, the court compels people to refrain from conduct characteristic of Sedom. In other words, now we explained, if court forces a person to waive his legal rights in order to prevent him from acting in a manner characteristic of the wicked city of Sedom, since it makes no difference to the brothers which portion they receive, since the parcels of land must be of equal value, whereas it matters to this brother that the area he receives shall be adjacent to the land he already bought, the court forces the others to give this brothers his portion along the boundary. Remember, this is just commentary. You only have to worry about the bold. So that's Rabbah. Rabbi Yosef disagrees. Rabbi Yosef objects to this, saying this is not a case involving conduct characteristic of Sedom, since the brothers can explain their refusal to grant their requests. The brothers can say to him, "We assess this field that you want for yourself as particularly valuable, like the property of the house of Bar Meron." The brothers can claim that the portion he wants is more desirable than the others, and for that reason, they do not want to give it to him. The Gemara concludes, and the halacha is in accordance with Rav Yosef, and the brothers can refuse the request. That's this piece of Talmud. There's more, but that's this piece. Now, this piece is very problematic because it seems that Maimonides is arguing with the Talmud. What just happened here? Here we read that the Talmud says there's two opinions. We have the case where one brother says, "I want my piece of my field next to my field, next to my neighboring field." Rabbah says, we tell the brothers, you must give this brother his both fields next to each other. Rav Yosef says, no, they can come and say, "We like the field that's the part that you want. For us, this is very valuable. It's like the property of Bar Marion, who was known to have good lands. We like that part." And Rabbi Yosef says that therefore the brother cannot force them to give them the piece next to his land. And now the most strangest thing is what the Talmud concludes, and the halacha is in accordance, in the bottom of the page, and the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Yosef. And the brothers can refuse the request. Seems like Maimonides is saying the exact opposite. So what do you do here? So the way you understand Maimonides is as follows. Maimonides says that this case of the Talmud Maimonides says, whoops, wrong page. What's going on over here? Oh, there you go. Maimonides says that the case of the Talmud is paragraph 2. Maimonides wrote up paragraph 1 by himself. In other words, Maimonides says that when the Talmud says the law follows Rav Yosef, that the brothers can say, "We like the field that you want, we like it better, and therefore you can have both your fields adjacent." Maimonides says there has to be some logic to that. What's the logic? The logic is there's two sections. One section is 30% of quality versus 70% of less quality. Here, that's the Talmud's case. That's the case where Rav Yosef says, where the brothers could insist, "I want one of them because I like it better." What's the case? That's the case because they're different. And because they're different, so the value is subjective. So if one brother says, if the brothers say, we like this one better, either the 30 or the 70, the Talmud says Rav Yosef is right, and you can enforce. You cannot force the brothers to give you both your fields next to each other. But because Maimonides says that, according to Maimonides, the Talmud's case is case number 2. But what would the Talmud say in case number 1, where their fields are exactly the same, 50-50? The fields are exactly the same quality. There's no benefit to one or the other. One is 1 acre and one's 1 acre. It's exactly the same. Here, according to Maimonides, I'm sorry, that's not where Rav Yosef gave his opinion, and that's not where the Talmud said the laws follows Rav Yosef. If it's exactly the same, Maimonides rules that you would be allowed to force your brothers to give you both your fields next to each other. So what we just did is, you see what Maimonides is doing. He's not just copying from the Talmud and giving the law. You read the Talmud, you would not reach the conclusion that Maimonides reached, because it's not clear what case the Talmud is talking about. When Maimonides reads the Talmud, he says the case that the Talmud says you cannot enforce, that's case number 2. But case number 1, where the fields are exactly the same, you could force your brothers to give you your section next to your field. So that's just showing. I'm just trying to show here how Maimonides has to read the Talmud. But the big question is, we have a story. But what is the case of the story? What exactly is the case? Is it case 1 or is it case 2? Are both sections of the field exactly the same, or is it a little bit different? And that's how Maimonides reaches a different conclusion than I would reach from reading that same piece of Talmud.
Rabbi, does location have any value?
Location has very much value, but when location comes to when it comes to the field, it has a little less value, because the way the field was the location has some value, but the way they evaluated real estate for the field is basically how much produce could it produce, and how much is the cost to produce the produce. So location has value. Remember, we said if one is closer to the main road and one is more distant, then the field is not the same, right? Then the part closer is more of quality. If one is closer to the river, so you don't have to schlep the water as far, that is included in the evaluation of the value. So location does have some value. But again, if we're talking about that we're 20 miles from the city and it's 2 halves of the field, and there's no river closer to one side, and they're both just as close to the main road, then the brother would say, look, it really makes no difference. The location is not really significant. So the answer is yes, in some cases the location does have value, but in some cases it has very little value.
Thank you, Rabbi. So it means that location has value if only if there is objective condition to justify it.
Correct.
But if it's just subjective, it doesn't take.
Correct. Now with houses, it's different, as we will see. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of discussion. Again, we're going to expand the law and then limit it again. So like I said, there's 3 chapters on this law. We only learned one section of 1 chapter. So we still have work cut out for ourselves. But this is cases I think is easier to understand than what's going to happen later, which is the case I started with, which is the case where if a neighbor wants to buy in this land, the other neighbors could say, hey, we want right of first refusal, but that we'll save for another time. So what we did today is basically talked about the concept of, could one brother say, look, give me my field if objectively speaking, you give me my fields next to each other. If objectively speaking, you're not losing anything and I stand to gain. Now, someone could put forth an argument and say, there's no such thing as objectively speaking, because quality is subjective. And that's what Maimonides is trying to do here, really. He tries to say, look, if you can make an argument that one portion is better for you, then the brother cannot force the other brothers to give him both fields together. But if it's the same, we are going to allow the brother to take both of his fields together. Why? We don't like the character of Sedom. What's the character of Sedom? I don't want you to benefit, even if your benefit is not at my expense. That's the character of Sedom that we don't like. Okay, I think that's enough for today. Questions, comments, jokes, disagreements, objections are all welcome. especially jokes. No, I'm kidding. Especially objections. And we will, God willing, continue in the future. And yeah, we should all meet in good health, of course.
Thank you.
Wonderful day, everybody.
Thank you, son. Thank you.
Take care.